Good morning, everyone. I'm Poppy Harlow in New York. So glad you're with me. Jim Sciutto has a well-deserved holiday week off. Mitt lets it rip. Incoming Senator and former Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney delivers a blistering message to the president in a scathing op-ed. Romney blasts President Trump's character and argues he has not, quote, risen to the mantle of the office. And speaking of office, Mitt Romney taking his seat on Capitol Hill in just one day. Will he lead the Republican resistance to Trump, or are his words just words? This morning, the president is responding in typical fashion on Twitter. More on that in a moment. But first, today marks day 12 of the government shutdown, and we are just hours away from a key meeting at the White House. President Trump has invited all those folks you see on your screen, key congressional leaders from both parties, to join him for a briefing today on border security. But a Hill source tells us this meeting appears to be more of a stunt than a serious attempt to have a discussion about ending the shutdown. So that's where we begin at the White House. My colleague Boris Sanchez joins me this morning. Good morning. So, very powerful, important people will all be in the room with the president. And what can we expect?
Hey there, Poppy. Yeah, it's unclear exactly what will come of this meeting. We heard from a source on Capitol Hill this morning that it's taking place at a bit of an unexpected location here at the White House, in the Situation Room, an area of the White House that's secured and typically reserved for monitoring and handling international conflicts, military disputes, etc. It gives you an idea of how this administration views the issue of immigration, with President Trump repeatedly referring to immigrants as invaders, especially before the midterm election. It's unclear that cameras will be there to capture what we saw last time that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer came here to the White House, those fireworks between those Democratic leaders and the president. Of course, we can sort of expect what may come of this meeting just based on what we've seen in terms of statements put out by both sides. Here's something from Nancy Pelosi. She writes that President Trump has given Democrats a great opportunity to show how we will govern responsibly and quickly pass our plan to end the irresponsible Trump shutdown. Just the first sign of things to come for our new Democratic majority, committed to working, #for the people. She's, of course, referring to that bipartisan package of 6 bills that Democrats are expected to pass through the House tomorrow. Unlikely that it will reach the president's desk. As he has said, he will not sign anything with only $1.3 billion in border security funding, which is what Democrats have offered. Here's a response from Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, where she refers to that. She writes, quote, President Trump made a serious, good faith offer to Democrats to open the government, address the crisis at our border, and protect all Americans. We've heard nothing back from the Democrats, who so far have refused to compromise. Again, unlikely that cameras will be there, so we'll see how both sides spin what comes out of this likely highly contentious meeting at the White House this afternoon, Poppy.
Spin? It's a new year, Boris. Maybe this will be a year sans spin. Before you go, my friend, I know there's a cabinet meeting as well. What can we expect?
You are quite the optimist, Poppy. Yeah, there's a cabinet meeting, according to sources, taking place just before noon. The president will be speaking there before cameras. A couple of things to watch for. First, today's actually John Kelly's last day at the White House. We're told by sources that Mick Mulvaney has already moved in, so we will not see him at this meeting. What to watch for, what the president says about Mitt Romney following that scathing op-ed that you mentioned, and how he talks about the shutdown and potentially his negotiations with Nancy Pelosi, whether he goes after her as aggressively as we've seen lately, or if he's in a different mood and actually strikes a tone which indicates he may be willing to strike a deal with Democrats.
All right, we'll see. The art of the deal. Will it happen, Boris? Thank you. Now to Mitt Romney and his blistering op-ed about the president, which comes just one day before he assumes his new Senate seat. Let me read you part of it this morning. Quote, the Trump presidency made a deep descent in December. The departures of Defense Secretary Jim Mattis and White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, the appointment of senior persons of lesser experience, the abandonment of allies who fight beside us, and the president's thoughtless claim that America has long been a sucker in world affairs all defined his presidency down. Romney goes on to write, with a nation so divided, resentful, and angry, presidential leadership in qualities of character is indispensable, and it is in this province where the incumbent shortfall has been most glaring. Ouch. Sunland Sarfati joins us on Capitol Hill with more. The timing, interesting, a day before, he takes his Senate seat. The question becomes why?
That's right. That is the big question. I think a lot of people up here, Poppy, are asking that very question. This was such a harsh message from Mitt Romney to the president. And certainly the timing is questionable, too. The fact that today it is one day before he is sworn in as the next U.S. Senator. Mitt Romney in this op-ed not only attacked some of his policies, but perhaps the most cutting here was the attack on President Trump's character. You read part of that where he talked about the deep dissent he perceives that the Trump administration went through in December. But he goes on to say in this op-ed, quote, "To a great degree, a presidency shapes the public character of the nation. A president should unite us and inspire us to follow our better angels. A president should demonstrate the essential qualities of honesty and integrity and elevate the national discourse with comedy and mutual respect." Now, we did hear from President Trump this morning. He tweeted out his response. He says, quote, "Here we go with Mitt Romney, but not so fast. Question will be, is he a flake? I hope not. Would much prefer that Mitt focus on border security and so many other things where he can be helpful. I won big and he didn't. He should be happy for all Republicans, be a team player and win." And that reference there from President Trump was a reference to the outgoing former Republican senator from Utah, Jeff Flake, someone who stood up as something of a chief critic and regularly challenged President Trump and his administration. So the fact that this op-ed is coming one day before he's sworn in, a lot of talk about will this be the role that Mitt Romney wants to take over, and it certainly seems that he's suggesting that he wants to take on that mantle as the next U.S. Senator here.
It is, but it is interesting. Flake voted with the president on almost everything. Right. You know, will Romney do the same, but then speak out against him? Sunland, thanks for the reporting. This afternoon, Mitt Romney gives his first interview with our very own Jake Tapper. Don't miss that on The Lead, 4 o'clock Eastern, only right here on CNN. Let's talk about all the news of the morning. Molly Ball is with me, national political correspondent for Time, and Rachel Bade, congressional reporter for Politico. Good morning, ladies.
Morning. Good morning.
Rachel, to you, notable that Romney is confronting the president just now, right, just as he assumes his Senate seat, versus those who did so on departure, right, like Flake and like Corker, know that they weren't running again. What is his goal in all of this? Is it a warning, shot across the bow?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he is very clearly embracing, stepping into that void that Bob Corker and Jeff Flake are leaving on Capitol Hill. And those are two senators who are comfortable criticizing the president and pushing back on his tone when they disagree, which is something we don't see a lot of Republicans on the Hill do, because a lot of them privately don't agree with the president on certain things, but they muffle that criticism because they're afraid of speaking out against him. But again, right here, you have Mitt Romney coming in on before his first day and speaking out. And I think it's really interesting to contrast that with one of his best friends in Congress who is leaving, Paul Ryan, who was his running mate in 2012. Both of these men have talked about listening to our better angels and sort of set themselves up as the mantle to have this sort of moral compass. But whereas Paul Ryan spent the past 2 years stifling any criticism he had of the president, it's clear Mitt Romney is breaking from one of his good friends from the 2012 campaign and is doing the exact opposite. So we'll just have to see how that works out with him in terms of trying to get stuff done, his priorities done with the president, while also criticizing him going forward.
Molly, of conservative Bill Kristol, an anti-Trumper, I should note, who writes this morning on Twitter, for now at least, Mitt Romney has become the leader of the Republican resistance to Trump. But, I mean, how much weight does that carry? Is it just Republican resistance in word or Republican resistance in action? Meaning, can he wield, the power to shift the party in any significant way here, or is that just not his aim?
Well, I actually don't think there's a distinction there. I think that words matter in this sense, and I think there's two really notable things about this op-ed. First of all, I think Romney is speaking less to the president or even the nation than to his fellow Republicans, directly rebutting the argument you hear most often from Republicans on Capitol Hill. He's saying out loud what a lot of people say privately or are thinking. Rachel's totally right about that. But he also, what you hear from Republicans so often is, this is all just noise, it's bluster, it's trash talk from Trump. You shut that out, you compartmentalize it, because what matters is the policy. He's saying, no, you can't separate those things. He's saying character matters, and he's framing it as a matter of moral morality, which we have not seen a lot of Republicans do. And second of all, there's a heavy emphasis on foreign policy here. And that's not something where the Senate has as much power to act, but it is where we have seen Republicans rebuke Trump or pass things he didn't necessarily love in the past. And so that seems to be where Romney's driving very hard. Don't forget, he wrote an entire book about American foreign policy. He's long been concerned, particularly about the Russian threat. And so that's the area, I think, where he plans to focus.
Right, and that's the area where Congress has tied the president's hands, right, on Russia, on sanctions, et cetera. To the shutdown, day 12, that we enter this morning on this front. No deal near in sight, and you have this key meeting, Rachel, at the White House today. We'll see what comes of it. The president wrote border security and this wall thing and shutdown is not where Nancy Pelosi wants to start her tenure as Speaker. Let's make a deal. You have a new piece out, fascinating, in Politico this morning. The headline, Why Trump Has Spared Pelosi from His Personal Vitriol So Far. Explain.
So far. No, listen, the president, we know that he loves to go after his adversaries. He makes nicknames for them. He hounds them on Twitter. And he, has had a opportunity to do that in the past couple of weeks when it comes to this shutdown and Nancy Pelosi. Some Republicans have been out there saying Nancy Pelosi was in Hawaii, the president was in Washington. He hasn't said anything like that. And, from my understanding and talking to people on both sides is that this is intentional, that he's taken a more mild approach to Pelosi because he sees her as someone he could get stuff done with next year, whether it's infrastructure, lowering prescription drugs prices, and he's sort of looking beyond the shutdown and trying to keep that positive relationship. But we know the president in moments of frustration will turn on people on a dime. And so I just think that this shutdown is a real test of their relationship. He admires her. He's told people privately he thinks she's strong and he admires that. But is he going to keep that sort of more professional relationship with her in the next few weeks? Or do they totally, does he lose that? And does it upend the relationship totally?
Molly, let me ask you finally about something that's not certainly getting as many headlines this morning as shutdown day 12 or Mitt Romney's op-ed that's everywhere. But it's really important, and it's something that happened yesterday on the debt ceiling and what Democrats signaled that they may reinstate the Gephardt rule. This came from John Yarmuth, of course, incoming Budget Committee chairman. The significance of Democrats doing that and attaching it to any budget that's passed.
Well, it's interesting. The debt ceiling hasn't been that much of an issue since Republicans took control of Washington. They were willing to make it an issue when there was a Democrat in the White House. And there's a long history of hypocrisy by both parties on this, right? Democrats made an issue out of the debt ceiling when there was a Republican in the White House. But it really hasn't been something you hear a lot about now that Trump is president. They haven't been willing to make it that much of an issue. So, yes, this is something where the Democrats could be, giving up a potential pressure point, something that they could make an issue out of to torment the Republicans. But it also doesn't apply to the Senate. So we'll see whether it actually matters.
All right, Molly Ball. Thank you, Rachel Bade. Appreciate it this morning. We are following all of the developments, of course, on the shutdown, but also on this man, the detained American in Russia, accused of being a U.S. spy. The Russian Foreign Ministry now tells CNN that Paul Whelan just got consular access. That is a significant development. We'll have the latest on the case ahead. Also, the first day of trading in the new year, and things could get, ugly, mixed. Look at that. You've got the Dow futures pointing slightly lower, NASDAQ up a little bit. We'll take you live to the New York Stock Exchange. And twin boys. It is day 12 of the partial government shutdown, and right now it's looking more and more like Congress will reconvene tomorrow with no immediate resolution in sight. Let's speak with Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois. He sits on the Intelligence Committee. Good morning.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. I wish Congress was beginning its session with a deal. We'll see if something happens at the White House today. But let me ask you about a letter that likely House Speaker Nancy Pelosi sent to you and all of your Democratic colleagues last night. Here's part of what she writes, quote, House Democrats will take action to end the Trump shutdown. She goes on to say, it's important to note that these bills contain no new wall funding. The White House last night, as you know, called this a non-starter. So I think first, yes or no to you, do you have any reason to believe that the president would sign a bill like this?
No, but I think you have to start somewhere, and you have to keep pushing the envelope. Merely staring at each other and talking on shows like this don't get anything done. You have to sit down. You have to make an effort. let's remember what Ms. Pelosi is proposing here, to reopen the government. 6 of the 7 bills we still have to approve, or what she's proposing are measures that came out of the Republican-controlled Senate. The 7th, we have a short-term Homeland Security measure just to get the government back open. And if you want to talk and debate the issue, fine. But in the meantime, government workers go back to work.
Look, there are 800,000 or so government workers affected by this, furloughed by this, not getting pay over the holidays. It's a real problem for them, certainly. But if your answer is no, this is not something that you think the president would sign, and you're the one who tweeted on New Year's Day you want to and look forward to a productive 116th Congress. You told the Daily Herald in Chicago this fall, I'm here to get things done. Is that really the best faith effort you think Democrats should be putting forward, something that you admit the president wouldn't sign?
Well, let's put the president, as he did, alone on this issue. He tweeted on Christmas that he was alone. Democrats and Republicans funded this government for 2018 on a bicameral, bipartisan basis. And they did, at least on a temporary basis, for 2019. In the 11th hour, King Lear, shouting at the winds, decided he didn't like, I guess, what he saw on TV and shut it all down. It is difficult for Democrats to help the president here and reach a compromise when he takes an extreme position. It is difficult for the rest of the world to act with this president when he's an isolationist, and even the Republicans when he acts impulsively on Saudi Arabia, Syria, Mattis, Sessions, and others. So, look, I'm willing to work on a bipartisan basis, have a history of doing so. The president makes it extraordinarily difficult when he acts impulsively on the 11th hour.
You do have a history of acting on a bipartisan basis, and so that's why I'm asking you, Congressman, if you had your druthers, would you do it differently? Would you not put forth what Nancy Pelosi is proposing? Would you side more with some of those that have told me on this show, like Congresswoman Jackie Speer, that she would be for $2.5 billion for wall funding, as the vice president proposed, if there was a DACA deal included? Or just yesterday, from the state of Michigan, Representative Debbie Dingell, who said, I'm sort of in the Jackie Speer camp. Would you like to see Democrats take that approach for something the president might sign, instead of this, which you say he won't?
Look, I think we have to approve things that make sense from a policy point of view and don't just get the budget approved. I was at the border in October, and the experts were talking to me about imaging, cameras, drones, roads, boats on the Rio Grande. This is technology for a modern time. So if the issue is border security, we can fund those, and we did. There's still over $1 billion worth of funds available for border security. For me to suggest that I would compromise by approving something that makes absolutely no sense and waste $5 billion, I just can't do that with my constituents and look them in the eyes. I'm for compromising, but it has to make some sense.
To your point about the $1 billion that hasn't all been spent yet, that was allocated in fiscal 2018, I hear you, but you know that that money was only allocated to fix or beef up existing parts of that 700 miles of fencing. None of it can go toward a border wall. It sounds like you're in the camp that says Democrats shouldn't budge, that not a dollar should go towards a border wall. Is that right?
I'm for resources that protect our border. I don't think the wall is the right thing to do. All the items I just mentioned address border security. And when the president talks about narcotics crossing the border.
But some Republicans and the president do. They think a wall is part of the solution. So is there a middle ground here for you? Or are you at the point where you're saying not a dollar toward this wall?
I don't think the wall makes any sense. If you're concerned about narcotics crossing, 85% of those narcotics are crossing at the checkpoints. If you're worried about security, the vast majority of those attempting to cross the border want to be apprehended because they're seeking a status here in the United States. They're not trying to sneak across. Why spend billions on an idea that doesn't work? Century-old technology. I'm for border security. I think the compromise is using that money on programs and projects that actually accomplish that goal. I think that's a worthy compromise.
One final question, given your important position on the House Intelligence Committee, on impeachment. One of the last times that you were on this show with us, you told my colleague Jim Sciutto, when he asked you about impeachment, you said, look, the president, in your words, has abused his power. You went on to say, I believe the president of the United States obstructed this investigation. Is impeachment, as this new Congress takes session, on your agenda?
It isn't, because as a former criminal defense attorney, I learned the hard way that you don't stop an investigation when you think you've found enough. You complete the investigation because you want to find out exactly what took place. What did the Russians do and who conspired with them, how to stop it in the future. So I tell the Republicans, protect the Mueller investigation. To be fair, I have to tell my own colleagues, if we had gone to impeachment when some wanted to, you would have known nothing about the Flynn, Manafort, or Cohen court cases. Let the investigation complete its course. Let's get the report. Let the House begin to reopen its part of the investigation so the American public knows exactly what took place. At that point in time, Congress can make that decision. But we need to do this fairly, rationally, and methodically.
Congressman Mike Quigley, Happy New Year. I appreciate your time this morning. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
All right. We are moments away from the opening bell on Wall Street, taking a look at futures. The Dow off almost 400 points in this first trading session set to begin. There you go. Dow down 400 as the market gets ready to open for the first time of the new year. Allison Kosik live with me at the New York Stock Exchange before the bell. Good morning.
Good morning, Papa. Yes, we are just moments away from the opening bell, a new year, but the same old volatility. Looks like, yes, the Dow will drop in the triple digits when that opening bell rings. We will be back with the opening bell after the break.
All right, the start of trading of the new year. Look at the market. Dow off 368 points, rough start to the new year. There is a lot driving this. With me now, our chief business correspondent, Christine Romans, as well as our business correspondent, Allison Kosik. Let's start with you, Allison, at the exchange. Look, I mean, this new year, same problems.
Yeah, new year, same problem. Although this morning we're seeing the concerns of last year really amplified. I'm talking about concerns about slowing global growth. We got some new data out of China showing that its manufacturing sector contracted from November to December. Here's the problem, though. This is the second report in a week out of China showing that its huge manufacturing sector is contracting. Ironically, President Trump has lauded the hits that China has taken both with its economy and with its stock market as sort of emblematic of his trade policy working, but it's actually backfiring because it's spooking the U.S. markets, as we can see, as we see the Dow tumbling 350 points in the first seconds of the trading day. Look, you're seeing the U.S. worry about China's economy. China is the second biggest economy. A lot of our companies have a huge chunk of business that they do in China, and if China is slowing, that could directly impact U.S. companies. And this sort of bleeds on to the other issue that is weighing on the market, the unresolved trade situation between the U.S. and China. Those issues continue to be unresolved, which means uncertainty that companies have about moving forward. We are just a few weeks away from the next earnings season, and you're going to see a lot of volatility until then, Poppy, because investors are going to want to hear from those companies, those CEOs. How is this U.S. trade policy affecting business? How is it affecting jobs? And how do they see things moving forward? So as we begin the day, we see the Dow down 355 points. Is expected to be another rocky session, the first session of 2019. Poppy.
All right, Allison Kosik, thank you so much. So, Christine, to you, let's just tackle China first. Yes, you saw the factory sector contract there for the first time in 2.5 years. I mean, the flip side of that could be, look, this would make Xi Jinping more open to a sweeter deal for the U.S. on trade.
And that's what the headline risk is. Does this make it look like President Trump and Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. trade negotiator, have more leverage against the Chinese? But remember, we had such a rocky going in our stock market at the end of last year that maybe that takes some of that leverage away. So that's what the headline risk will be on the trade issue. You've got trade, you've got growth, and then you also have the Fed. The Fed is raising interest rates. So those are the three, I think, big drivers for this year, no question. And for stock market investors, it was the first meaningfully down year in 10 years. For S&P 500, down 6.2% last year. That's not something that stock investors since the crisis have seen. That's what also feeding into this nervousness.
Oh. The president yesterday was tweeting about oil prices being down, saying this is good, this is like a second tax cut. There's a flip side to that.
Well, one of the reasons why oil prices are down is because concerns about global growth. You know, you don't always want to root on a crash in the oil market, but what the president is tapping into in a very populist way is a real feel economic indicator. Not everyone can feel the stock market. About half of American households have stocks, but just about everyone goes out there and fills up their gas tank every week or every 2 weeks can feel that gas prices are down, and they're down in, I think, 13 states below $2 a gallon. 225, I think, is the AAA number. So the president has stopped attaching his personal reputation to the stock market now that it is faltering, and he is now transferring that onto gas prices, which is also risky because gas prices could start to go up as well.
When you look at the impact that the government shutdown has on the market, I know you can't draw a direct line, but you can draw a confidence line, right? And that affects everything.
I think the government shutdown, the partial government shutdown, adds into the political uncertainty part of this, which is one of the pieces of the puzzle or pieces of the pie. And I think as each day, Poppy, goes on, there will be a magnified effect of that shutdown. For example, farmers who are getting bailouts because of the soybean tariffs from China, right? Will they not be able to process those checks? Somebody who needs now for the first time Social Security benefits. I just was on the FTC website about identity fraud, right? Shut down. So there will be these knock-on effects. It will get worse as each day goes on, and real people are going to feel it, not just tourists. Real people, government workers, and everyone will feel it.
800,000 of the government workers. Thank you, Roman.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it very much. We'll keep a close eye on the market. Dow off 370 points here at the open. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo demanding more information from Russia on the U.S. citizen who has been detained. Welcome back. Moments ago, the Russian Foreign Ministry said that the U.S. citizen detained on spying charges can now speak to the U.S. consulate in Russia. We're talking about Paul Whelan, the Michigan native. Also this morning, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is responding to his arrest. Listen to this.
We've made clear to the Russians our expectation that we will learn more about the charges, come to understand what it is he's been accused of, and if the detention is not appropriate, we will demand his immediate return.
We do have a lot more in terms of details this morning, including these. According to military records, Whelan spent 14 years in the U.S. Marines and was discharged for bad conduct. At a special court-martial, he was convicted on several charges related to larceny. That's according to records provided by the Marine Corps. We're also learning a lot about his activity on social media. Let's go to my colleague Marty Savage. He joins me again this morning in Novi, Michigan, where Paul Whelan is from. What can you tell us on those fronts?
Poppy, there's some interesting stuff you will find on social media, particularly when it comes to Russian social media and what's referred to as BK. I would say it's kind of a Russian equivalent to Facebook. And it appears that Paul Whelan has been on that site for almost 13 years, dating all the way back to 2006, which is roughly around the time that BK got started. And he is listed on there with his name. He's got about 70 friends as you look at the profile, 4 followers, and at least 17 photos that he has posted there. Most of them are, of course, of him in various places all around the world. And remember, with his security job, he has traveled all around the world, and he has a number of what appear to be military or law enforcement contacts on there as well. Not surprising, again, because you work in the realm of global security, but you get some kind of look at his life there. It's very clear that he's what you would refer to as a Russian-phile. In other words, a person who has very much been fascinated with Russia for some time. In fact, it was while he was still in the Marine Corps that he made his first visit to Russia. That was in '06 when he got some leave and he went to Moscow. So he's been fascinated. He says, even on this website, that growing up during the Cold War, he always looked at Russia as the enemy. But when he went to that country, it's pretty clear that he was fascinated by the culture, made friends, and he's gone back there numerous times afterwards, knows a bit of the Russian language, can get around. So he does have an interesting past when it comes to that country, Poppy.
And he also, I believe, Marty, at one point praised President Trump on this social media site. Is that right?
He does. There's a photograph, and there's a statement where he says, "God bless President Trump." Now, you know, I'm always leery sometimes of social media because of the ability for people to manipulate it. But, it does appear that this is a legitimate site. Doesn't appear that it goes back to him. His family was not fully clear exactly on him being a member of this website, but you know, his pictures are there and the posts are there, so we will continue to follow that trail. It just gives you more insight as to his connection to this country And whether it plays into the predicament he's in, we don't know as yet.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Martin Savage, thank you very much for all the reporting from Michigan this morning. Meantime, Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan arrived at the Pentagon earlier today.
Priority number one.
Job done.
Priority number one, he says, get the job done. He replaces General James Mattis. Mattis left the office, resigned in protest to President Trump's withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria as one of the key factors. Another member of the president's cabinet on his way out today is Ryan Zinke's last day as Interior Secretary. He resigned last month amid allegations that he used his office for personal gain. At the time, the Interior Secretary said he couldn't justify spending thousands of dollars defending himself against, quote, what he calls false allegations. President Trump has not announced his choice to replace Zinke yet. LaPortia Washington is out of the hospital this morning after being shot in the head Sunday in Houston. Washington was shot as she used her body to protect her daughters when a man opened fire on their car. Her 7-year-old daughter, Jasmine Barnes, was killed in that shooting, and authorities believe the incident was completely unprovoked. Officials say they believe the suspect was driving a red or maroon pickup. They describe him as a bearded white man, possibly in his 40s.